It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
Zag Insiders Jim Meehan and John Blanchette step away from the paper and up to the microphone to give you the biggest storylines. It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders podcast.
Here we go.
Good Monday morning and welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. We were thinking there might be a couple more of these podcasts, but the Arkansas Razorbacks had other ideas, eliminated Gonzaga in the Sweet 16. So this will probably serve as the season wrap-up. We'll take a look at that Arkansas game, the season, what lies ahead. We'll dive right into all of it. But first, our panel, we have Richard Fox, television analyst for Gonzaga games regionally and locally on KHQ, SWX, and Root Sports. We have longtime Spokesman-Review columnist John Blanchette, and myself, Jim Meehan, beat writer for Gonzaga with the Spokesman-Review. Gentlemen, we sat here a week ago and kind of, at least I know I did, thought the matchup was pretty good for Gonzaga facing Arkansas in the Sweet 16. We whiffed on that one. We weren't quite on target. Airball. Richard, what did we miss about Arkansas, or maybe what we didn't see with Gonzaga that led to a pretty surprising upset in San Francisco?
Yeah, well, I think we missed the possibility that they just played terribly, to be fair. I mean, you look across the board at, particularly offensively, just the struggles. Strother's struggles in the tournament just continued. He made some shots inside the arc, but 1 of 5 from 3, 1 of 14 for the tournament. I mean, you compare that to what he did going into the tournament. Last 4 games, averaged almost 13 points a game at 46% from 3, and Bolton struggled and Nembhard struggled mightily. This is again after playing really well the previous 6 games, a couple tournament games, and down the stretch twice against San Francisco, twice against St. Mary's. I think all 3 of us expected them to play well in the game, and when you don't play well, it's hard to beat anybody, let alone a solid Arkansas team. And I had terrible flashbacks to my senior year when Rony Churyov got hit with some, let's just say, challenging calls against Nevada, and I all that came back watching what Holmgren had to go through with some of those whistles. So, I think it's a combination. Arkansas, you've got to tip your hat to them. I mean, they played incredibly hard. They're really handsy defensively, but I really don't think it was Arkansas. I can't imagine there was anybody in that locker room after the game that thought they lost to a better team. They just chose an opportune time not to play well, and that's the cruelty and the beauty of this thing. It's a one-game situation, and you just can't afford to do that as you move further into the tournament.
It is unforgiving, one and done in the NCAA tournament, and not much margin for error. John, what did you see when you watched those 2 hours unfold?
Yeah, it was much the same. I think, Arkansas did what we figured it was going to do. It shot about 40%, 28% or whatever from 3. That's who they are. They're not very deep, but they're not necessarily very big inside, with the exception of Williams. But they did everything that they had to do, and the physical nature of the way they played, particularly not necessarily so much inside, although they're physical enough inside, but the way they made every possession hard, particularly on Andrew Nembhard, and focused so much of their attention on him, kind of the chopping off the head of the snake before he could get the ball to the people it needed to go to. Yeah, it was definitely a game where Gonzaga didn't play as well as it could have. I think that was kind of the whole situation in the entire tournament for them. I don't think they played at their best. They just didn't have the same kind of crispness that we saw it for many stretches of the regular season and into the conference tournament. And like both of you guys said, it's hard to overcome. You can't have a C minus game at this tournament. Maybe against the 16 seed you can have it, but certainly not against the Memphises and the Arkansas and people even better than those teams. You have to play your best every night, or near your best every night, and Gonzaga just couldn't summon it.
Well, as you mentioned, Andrew Nembhard had a difficult evening in that game. Arkansas spent a lot of energy trying to slow him down, which slowed down Gonzaga's running game to some degree. They put Adis Toney on Andrew Nembhard. He's about 6'6", long, strong, athletic. Had just shut down a kid from New Mexico State that scored 37 in the first round. Toney held him to, I think, 12 points on 16 shots in the next game. Toney did not have as much luck against Duke. I didn't watch every play, but I do recall a sequence where he got bullied inside by Paulo Banchero. And the next play, he gave up a wing three to one of Duke's guards. So, but he did a fine job on Nembhard. And I think the impact of that went way beyond Andrew. I think it made getting into their offense harder, where they were at, how they guarded the pick and roll, that staple, that high screen, that staple of Andrew's game, where he either makes the right decision, scores it for himself, or creates for a teammate. Zags, I think their quality of shot was okay, not great. Other than Drew, not a ton of paint presence. I thought that was one of the biggest differences. They've been great inside all year, especially their guards, especially finishing in transition or even half court. Not as much against Arkansas. John, the job that they did on Nembhard kind of reverberated throughout the offense.
Well, I think it did. I think, like I said before, I think if you can get Andrew out of sorts, it helps keep the other players on the team a little out of sorts too. They're not getting the ball in the positions that they're used to getting it. But I also think, for all the attention he got and all the bumping and slapping that he got, Andrew got some pretty good looks. A couple of runners in the key early that hit the front iron. Those were open shots. I'm not saying there wasn't contact on the way to those shots, but he had opportunities to score and to loosen things up, and it just didn't happen. The size of Toney obviously was a factor, and I think it's also a factor, and not that it's necessarily new, but Andrew Nembhard's on the floor for 40 minutes every game, and basically the ball is in his hands every possession, every trip up the court. There's no break for him. You go back to last year when he and Suggs were able to share and take the pressure off each other in those situations. Andrew didn't have that this year. And while most games it didn't necessarily matter, and even against really, really good opponents, it didn't necessarily matter. It mattered this night, just in a cumulative effect, I think. And I think you also saw in the second half, I think you saw him shy away from a few things because of his inability to get those shots to go down. And again, maybe because of the constant attention he was getting from Arkansas.
Yeah, kind of a tough night, pretty much all the way around. If the backcourt, Rasir Bolton had a difficult night as well. I think you saw the athleticism of Arkansas chase him down on a breakaway and block that layup attempt he had. I didn't even see the guy coming, and he ended up swatting it. And the Chet Holmgren, scoreless in the first half, dealt with some foul issues. Drew was effective as always, 25 in the middle, 9 out of 19, not quite his usual rate, but still found a way to be as productive a scorer as there is in this tournament. He had to average over 27, 28 a game. And then Strother, I think, hit 1 3, but not quite the regular season Julian Strother we saw. Richard, what'd you make of the offense, the shot quality, and what was missing on last Thursday.
I thought they got the shots they wanted, particularly in the first half. They just missed. I mean, Arkansas is good. They've beaten some teams, but the reality is you miss shots. To John's point and to your question, Jim, Arkansas clearly wanted to get onto Nemhard's hip and force him to the rim versus allowing him to kind of dance with that screen and either find the 3-point shot. I mean, he was 5 of 10 against Memphis. And Williams isn't much of a shot blocker, but he just is always trying to fall down. And so it makes you nervous to get to the rim. And so they forced Andrew into those floaters, but he got 3 or 4 of those in the first half that he usually makes. And to John's point, in the last 240 minutes of the season, Andrew played all but 3. Now, I know he's a young guy, but at some point there's a wear and tear that does go into effect. And the complete lack of anybody that could come in and play that position this year really hurt them. And I think you saw that to Jim's point, or rather John's point. Last year they had Suggs and him together where, and they got Ayayi too, another guy who could handle the ball for stretches and could occupy, or rather play in a pick and roll situation. Hickman and Bolton had moments, a handful a game, maybe trying to run a pick and roll, but it's all Andrew all the time. And he looked tired to me. I mean, he just did. Most of his shots were short. He didn't have the same burst up the floor. They just missed shots. I mean, they got the looks that I think they would have wanted. Julian could not hit anything from behind the arc. He's a guy who shot it at a really good clip over the year. And quite frankly, he had one of the more forgettable tournaments for a guy that, the pressures, when you're in that position, the 4th or 5th option, there really isn't a ton of pressure. It's on Timmy and Holmgren and Andrew in a way. They've got the keys to the car. You just have to play your game and step up and knock down shots, and he just couldn't do that. Arkansas is a good defensive team, but there's nothing that they did, at least that I could see, that was causing Gonzaga to speed up, miss open shots. It's just one of those nights, and that's the frustrating thing about this deal is you don't get to. It's not a best of 3. I think if this is a best of 3 series, I think Gonzaga wins and is on their way. But that's just not how it works. So it's just very, very. It's a very disappointing loss in my view when you look at all the losses that they've had in the last 20 some odd years. That's a team in Arkansas that they should have beat.
Well, an interesting night for Chet Holmgren as well. Up and down in a lot of ways. A couple of fouls in the first half. Put him on the bench, scoreless in the first half. Did block 2 shots to equal Brandon Clark's single season record of 117 that he set in 2019. And did kind of perk up in the second half when he stayed on the floor after his 3rd foul and finished, I think, with a double figures, a double-double, and hit a 3 ball and helped out on the offensive end and obviously the defensive end. I kind of had flashbacks of Zach Collins in the title game where, he was every time he turned around, the whistle was blowing and he was going to the bench in foul trouble. I think that happened to some degree with Chet the other night, and even way back with Shemek Karnowski. I can remember tweeting a lot that they called Shemek for illegal standing. He just he stand and wall up and
is that Duke?
And there's a foul. And it's like
was that Duke game, Elite 8?
Well, there was several times, but I think you're right, the Duke game. But it just big guys sometimes don't get a lot of leeway when somebody comes flying down the lane. But so twofold question on Chet. How legit were the calls in your opinion? And then what was the impact of him playing 23 minutes instead of maybe 29, 30, like we're used to seeing in bigger games? Richard, go ahead.
I mean, enormous. I don't know. What he had 23 minutes, 14 rebounds. He was really the one guy on the defensive glass that could finish the possession for GU consistently. And he started getting a rhythm in the second half offensively. I mean, it's just enormous. You're effectively taking the #1 draft pick off the floor for GU for large stretches. And he's a big part of what they do. And he's a big part of what Timmy's able to do, because he's just that fourth guy that in theory can spread the floor and open things up for Drew around, in that painted area. So, I'm sure we don't want to derail this final podcast and talk about the officiating all that much, but it's a problem in college basketball, the level of officiating. I know it's like the third rail for some reason. I don't understand. My least favorite cliche is the officiating didn't cost us the game. I just don't understand where that came from. At least not, you can't say that anymore because of the NIL, but for years, the only guys getting paid to run up and down the floor with the guys in stripes. It's a profession. And I think there should be some level, some standard that needs to be met. And, across the board in the tournament, just the inconsistency of how they officiate the game and just some of the very basic calls that are missed. I mean, 2 out of bounds, the one on the baseline was brutal. They ended up scoring a 3. Nembhard gets tripped right in front of the official, doesn't call it. I believe they would go down and score. I mean, those are calls that you can't miss. Those are not complicated calls to this isn't a judgment. This is right in front of you. You need to be able to make that call. And I thought the calls on Chet were they were unprofessional basketball calls, put it that way. I wouldn't expect I'd expect a guy making $15-20 on a Saturday to make that call, not a guy making $2,500 to $5,000 a night making that call. So it's disappointing. And, for GU, it certainly, had they shot the ball well, they would have won that game despite those fouls. Yeah. But when you're trying to find a rhythm and you're trying to find a way to win a game where you're not shooting the ball well, which you should have the right to do, when your starting center and #1 draft pick gets saddled with those fouls, I mean, that's just very difficult to overcome. And how many games in this tournament have been close down the stretch and there's a handful of calls that have a real impact? I think by definition that implies that the quality of officiating is not good. And I think Gonzaga got the brunt of that against Arkansas, specifically with Holmgren, but some of those other calls are just calls you have to make.
Yeah. The block charge call to me is completely out of control almost. I mean, it's
an epidemic in college basketball. Absolute. It's the only level. You don't even see this in high school. Yeah. You don't see it at any professional level. You don't see it this way in women's basketball. Like, it is just men's college basketball where you have this call, this charge block. I mean, I grew up where the tie went to the runner, but in basketball, the tie goes to the defender.
Yeah.
If it's not just a clear charge, I don't know. It drives me crazy. I'll be done now. All my friends over the weekend and my wife, God bless her, heard me go on and on about this. So I'll stop now.
Well, I mean, it's not uncommon to see 7 or 8 charges a game, it feels like. And guys go flying out of bounds like they've been hit by a Mack truck. The offensive player's just standing there, still gathered, still in position to score. That one, and then, like I said, the verticality rule doesn't seem to be 100% true all the time. I feel like some of the bigger defenders like Chet get penalized sometimes for just standing straight up and challenging, or jumping straight up and challenging. John, your take on the foul calls, your take on the limited minutes for Chet Holmgren and what?
Yeah, I can't disagree with Richard in any sense. As far as the calls themselves, I mean, I guess you can say maybe the first 2 in the first half were somewhat legit. You kind of saw Chet even maybe cussing himself a little bit, at least on one of those. The 3 in the second half ranged from dubious to just an outright joke. The last one was ridiculous. Given what's allowed to go on the perimeter, the kind of slapping and bumping that's allowed to go on the perimeter, you can't penalize the guy for being 7 feet tall. I mean, and standing inside. It's just not right. And they've got to do something to fix it. Unfortunately, the guys who have the most say aren't being vocal enough. And I'm talking about the coaches. who have a say with the rules committee and in the management of the game in the off season, they're going to have to start standing on the desk and stomping their feet a little bit to get something done, because there has to be a change. And the block charge thing is ridiculous. Guys aren't defending the basket; they are simply running in and getting in the way of a player. They're not trying to make a defensive play in any sense of the word. It's just run in and stand, and then get knocked over. It's not basketball. It really isn't. And it's Mike DeCourcy of the Sporting News, I think, invented charbage, and that's what it is. It's charbage. It's just terrible. And specifically to Chet, taking him out of the game. Let's say, Anton had a nice game on the boards, but he's not a go-to offensive threat. You don't have to guard him outside. That clogs up the middle allows teams to clog up the middle on Drew. And there's no rim protection when Chet's out. So it completely skews the game. The alternative, we'll get more rim protectors. Well, okay, good luck with that. You're not going to find them like Chet Holmgren. It's just a team shouldn't have to be penalized for a guy standing his ground in the paint.
And the one thing if I can add something, Jim, it's not just the impact on that game.
No,
you've got Anthony Black deciding today between Arkansas and GU, right? I mean, that may impact his decision. You've got money for conferences through advancing into the tournament. And this is a livelihood for a lot of people. You've got to fix this problem. It impacts the product. I mean, we're degenerates. We love college basketball because we grew up with that, and the tournament is still always going to be exciting. But the quality of the product is not good, and a big reason for that is the officiating. So anyhow,
no, I think at the highest levels of college basketball, they're going to have some discussion on that concept of freedom of movement. That years ago. They did make some changes. They did enforce it quite a bit, hammering the cutters, cheating off your guy in the key and hammering a cutter. They took away some of those things. And now I think it's gone back the other way, especially in the tournament. The whistles for the physicality just haven't been there nearly as often. And it turns the game more into a wrestling match. I was watching Timmy in the lane. I think we had a picture. We might have run it in the paper. He posted up, he caught it, he went to turn. He had one guy behind him reach around and have his wrist. And then the guy right next to him had both wrists. And he kept turning and turning. It was like in slow motion, they were holding him down in the middle of the lane. So you'd have to believe somebody had seen it. But
I don't care about that as much as I care about if a guy steps out of bounds in front of you, you got to blow your whistle. Yeah. If a guy gets tripped in front of you, you've got to blow your whistle. Like, let's just start with let's create less expectation and just try to get to the bare minimum. You have to make those calls. And Gonzaga's just been. I mean, I'm sure we've benefited. I know we've benefited. I can't think of them. Those never stay in your mind. But who of us can forget the North Carolina game? The guy's hands out of bounds, and the official's standing over the play. Yeah. So I don't know how they fix it. No one's asking me, that's for sure, but it's a problem.
Let's move on. Another Gonzaga season ends number one in the first poll of the season, number one in the last poll of the season, but they fall short of the national championship goal that has become the quest every March and April. With a team of Gonzaga's stature, a program that is routinely winning 30 games, obviously plays the difficult non-conference schedule, but they're always going to be judged, I think, because of what level they've reached. That grade card is going to be judged on March Madness. Is it complete or incomplete? And so that kind of makes it hard to kind of put their seasons in perspective if they're not cutting down the nets. And here we are again, this kind of season where they went to the Sweet 16, 28-4, a couple of All-Americans, 3 ranked wins in the non-conference, all those things. actually a couple more in the conference season by beating St. Mary's. So, John, how do we evaluate another year where Zags had all kinds of success for the first 4 months and even into the NCAA tournament, but didn't get to the final destination?
Well, I know Mark Few doesn't like to have it all boiled down to the last game or the last few games of the tournament. But let's face it, like you said, because of the stature they've reached, that's what's going to happen now. And I don't think it's necessarily unfair. I mean, it's not just the seed line and the AP poll saying that Gonzaga is number one. The metrics, the measurables have backed that up as well. I will say this year feels significantly different than last year in the finish. The Zags didn't play their best game against Baylor in the championship last year, but that seemed mostly Baylor's doing to me. They were very much the aggressor. They took charge of that game. They were the better team to me. And I think I've said before, I think you match those two teams 10 times, Baylor wins 6 or 7. There's disappointment there, but I don't know if there's a cause for regret necessarily. This was different. Arkansas turned around and got handled by Duke. And right now, Duke is playing with the confidence, the flow that we see from Gonzaga when Gonzaga is at its best. And the Zags just weren't at their best in this tournament. And for me, this was more like 2013 minus the Gary Bell injury. That team wasn't playing well when it got to March for whatever reason. This team didn't play its best when it got to March. I think you saw it from the 3-point line. You just saw it in the games. Everything was a struggle. But that said, there's a consensus among the guys who do winning and losing for a living that the achievement is in putting yourself in the position to win it all on a regular basis. Doesn't mean you're ever necessarily going to hoist the championship trophy, but it's your chances are better than catching lightning in a bottle to do it. I'm a track guy. I talked to Ryan Krause, the Olympic gold medalist in the shot a few weeks ago, and we talked about his search for kind of the outlier, the 78-foot throw, the 80-foot throw that's going to put the world record out of reach. Well, he's going to get there by being consistent at 75 feet, not at 70 feet. Gonzaga's gotten itself to the point where it's in the hunt every year. The flip side of that is that there's going to be the disappointment and the notion that, they're not achieving, they're underachieving. Who would have ever thought to say that about Gonzaga? Well, people are saying it. Is it legit? Well, I think this year it is. I think they did underachieve this year. I don't think this team was as good as last year's team, but I think it was a team that needed to go farther than the Sweet 16.
Richard, thoughts on the year and how you put it in perspective with what they did and what they didn't do?
Yeah, I think two things can be true. I think it was a fabulous year on any number of levels, to win the number of games they did, to have to retool the way they did, losing, 2 first-round picks and a guy can, small, but some minutes in the NBA just kind of really shows the talent that they lost on the perimeter. And having 2 All-Americans, the year Nembhard did, Bolton seamlessly coming in and having a real impact both on the floor and off the floor, Julian's growth. I mean, it was by countless metrics a fabulous year. But to John's point, with success comes expectations that you don't control. And there is going to be a narrative nationally, certainly, that Gonzaga is missing something. And a lot of folks point to the league, and if you're GU, you've got to be careful how much you bark back about the quality of your league when you haven't won it yet, because it certainly felt like the level, they just don't see that level of athlete in conference. That's just a fact. And as good as you are, Arkansas is again a fine team. You should have beat them, but they certainly have a level of athlete, particularly on the perimeter, that you just haven't seen in a while. You can tell me what we saw it the week before against Memphis. That's fine. But it looked to me like Memphis took a lot out of you because you just hadn't seen that all that much. So I'm with John. I didn't think this team was at that, that Carolina team's level or last year's level, but they were certainly right under that. And this is a team they're, if you don't meet your own expectations, which this team's was to get to the Final Four, then it's okay for me to be disappointed that you didn't get there. And that's how I feel. It felt like they had more in them. And, I'm not sure what you can do as a staff or even as a player. I mean, sometimes you just don't play well. And it happens. And it happens in every walk of life. You have a bad day. And it felt like they had a string of them on the floor where they never got to that level we saw in November when they were playing all these big name teams. And for the most part, competitive in all those games or winning those games. It just felt like we never got to that last level where we saw everything that this team could be at their finest. So, I think that Wichita, I was trying to think of an example of another loss. And I think John may have hit that example with the Wichita State loss. Now hindsight always provides that perspective, and that Wichita State team and also that program went on a significant run. And a lot of those players on that Wichita State team ended up proving to be high-level players, with 2 or 3 of those guys playing in the league. So you can justify that down the road. You can say, well, look, that team ended up being really special. And that may be the case with Arkansas, but it's, today, the Monday after the loss, I think it's a very disappointing end of the year, but I don't think we should lose sight on what they did leading up to that. It was quite a success on a lot of levels.
Well, let's move on to the final topic, and that's our look ahead at next year, what that roster might look like, who's coming, who's going, who's additions, subtractions. There's going to be the usual roster churn and maybe a touch more. This year, you've got a senior backcourt, Andrew Nembhard, Rasir Bolton, both have an option of an extra COVID year. I think it's a long shot for either to come back, maybe not quite as much for Rasir as Andrew. I think Andrew's declared twice, and he frankly had a great year. I think he was borderline All-American, in my opinion. It could have given him 3 All-Americans, and I think has some value, some fit in the NBA, maybe as your second or third point guard early on. You've got Drew Timme, two All-American years back-to-back, similar stats, scores it at the highest level you can score it. I think in the college game, there's probably not many more who can do what he does inside. Does that translate to the NBA? His ability to guard and switch will probably be the biggest question mark there. Does he stay or go? You could lose 4 starters from this unit this year as you move forward. Richard, I guess we'll start with you. What do you think Drew Timme's doing, and how young could this team be? I mean, this could be a new ground if they don't hit the transfer portal hard for next season.
Well, you naturally take it for granted when you're in the middle of a run like this. We may really appreciate it next year. Is the way I guess I'd answer the question, just because of the roster turnover. We've 7 years here where we've been either in the Final Four or knocking on the door, a couple national championship games. I mean, who knows what that team with Tilly and Woolridge would have done, starting the tournament here in Spokane. We've talked about Drew a few weeks back. I mean, he's, the one, I don't have a lot of, negative criticism of the athletic department. I mean, I think they've really threaded the needle over the years quite well. But I'm not sure we need to wait 20 years to retire guys' jerseys. And I hope we retire Drew Timme's jersey as soon as possible. That guy's an absolute legend when it comes to Gonzaga, and he's already put himself up and, he's moving up the list of great college players. And that would really be, the reason to come back. One of the 2 reasons. One is just to keep enjoying this experience in college, keep kind of building on what your legacy is. I mean, the legend that is you is that you are one of the great college basketball players to have played in the last 10, 20 years. Just look at his numbers and his consistency. He's got a great personality. And quite frankly, if I don't know, I certainly can't prove this, but I'd be willing to wager he can make quite a bit more coming back than he could playing at the next level right now. I don't see a path for him into the NBA, and that's not a criticism of him as a person, obviously, or his incredible talent, but sometimes it just doesn't translate to the NBA from college. And I'm not sure his game translates all that well, particularly without the lack of a really good jump shot out to three. And plus those defensive concerns that you'd mentioned, Jim. So, I mean, if he comes back, it changes the whole narrative. I mean, that's just the way it goes. If you bring back a guy like Timmy, they can figure out the rest. You're still going to be awfully competitive, and no one's going to want to play you. But if he leaves, and you presume, Chet's obviously gone, and I'm with you, Jim. I think the senior guards at some point you're ready to try something different. They don't have a lot coming back other than Strother if Drew leaves, and that's kind of a scary place to be in. I mean, even though they've had a great run of bringing grad transfers in, those guys have come in to supplement or to bolster the guys who've been here.
Yeah.
I don't know how that works if you're bringing those guys in to lead what it is you're doing. I think that's a hard thing to be successful with. So, we might all feel a whole lot better by this evening if Anthony Black commits and it's in 2 weeks, Drew says I'm coming back. But right now, I mean, the question marks across this roster are endless. We certainly know the talent that is Hickman and Salas, but I don't know if I saw anything down the stretch that made me feel comfortable that those guys are ready to lead a top end Division I program. And we haven't seen Dominic Harris in how many months? He's a kid who showed some flashes, but never really got an opportunity on that team last year. And now he's been hurt all of this year. Is he a guy who could step up? We just have question marks up and down the roster.
Yeah, I think as it stands right now with who you would maybe think is leaving and who's staying, you might have a starting lineup. If they rolled the ball out tomorrow of Nolan Hickman at the point, Salas and Strother at 2 and 3. Maybe Anton in the middle and Ben Gregg is the stretch 4. Really young other than Anton. But I do think Hickman, Salas are considerable talents. I do think I saw enough to lead me to believe they can make that jump to a bigger role, just like Julian made from freshman to sophomore year. Not in numbers or stats, I should say, but I think in being able to take on those bigger roles as starters, perhaps. But the Zags, they'll have their eye on the transfer portal, and I think maybe one difference this year is they might be looking at bigs in the transfer portal. Not as many bigs in the transfer portal as guards. GU has had enormous success with transfer guards over the years. Really, kind of the only bigs or what you would say 3, 4, 5 type players. 3, 4s. Drew Barham way back was a 2-year grad transfer, more of a wing, and then Byron Wesley on the 2015 team kind of held down that 3 spot or small power forward spot. That could change this time around. John, what's the forecast for that roster? Who comes, who goes, and what's the biggest thing? I guess maybe they've got to address if guys leave like we anticipate.
Well, I think Mark's got to have some magic up his sleeve here. As far as Richard's point about Drew Timme, his decision changes everything one way or the other. And I'm sure it will be made clear to Drew that you're not going to be doing casino ads in the G League if he winds up on one of those contracts.
I don't know, man. Is there a statute of limits on these agreements?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I just don't see a G League guy being on my TV constantly, not just in basketball games but other games or other shows doing ads for the casino. And the fact of the matter is there are some opportunities there. He's cashed in on some already that he's not going to have as it's a pejorative, I guess, but a marginal player in the NBA. He's not going to be a starter, certainly not right away. And I think Richard's point about the game his game doesn't necessarily translate to what the NBA is now, what it's become. which is, again, not a knock. He's an amazing college player. So, I think those kinds of things will be made clear to him and it will be weighed. But I also know players like to challenge themselves. Players like, and just like the guards have done it, and it's time maybe for them to move on. There's going to be a part of Drew that feels that way too, and maybe that's the big part. If he's gone, then Mark better pull not maybe one but possibly two big guys out of the portal. You need a Brandon Clark right now is what you need, and somebody whose physical game can change games. We just don't know. The flip side is, of course, is that Gonzaga has always been known for its developmental component. Guys who, maybe were a little bit under the radar or made huge jumps while they were at Gonzaga. Well, you're going to need some of that here. We haven't seen Caden Perry because of his back issues. We don't know what's there. There's obviously a raw physical talent, but is there enough skill and enough consistency there that he can become a major factor next year? And the freshman guards in particular. Can Nolan Hickman be consistent over the course of as many minutes as he's going to have to log? Can Hunter Salas develop an offensive game to at least complement his great defensive ability? Are those, I don't think those are 40-minute guys. They aren't Andrew Nemhard yet, and they won't be next year. So that's why you need, there's going to need to be supplemented with guys, and maybe they get a good decision today or a decision for them to celebrate today on the recruiting trail, but they're going to need more. And, maybe next year is the year that, there's a market correction a little bit in terms of expectation and what we know. But we've also thought that other years, and Mark and his staff have been able to get pieces out of the portal, get freshmen out of the freshman recruiting class that change the whole dynamic. I would not be surprised if they do it again. But I think everyone will be waiting on pins and needles for Drew Timmy's decision.
For the second straight year, really, the off season comes down to that first and foremost. So we'll see what happens with that. It's time for us to move on. Season-ending podcast, I'm assuming today on the Zags Basketball Insiders podcast. We sure enjoyed it all year. John Blanchette, Richard Fox, our producer, Jesse Tinsley. Great to just shoot the breeze with you guys every week. Enjoyed it a lot. Hope to do it again. We'll see. Maybe we'll have an off-season podcast. That's for the powers to be. But I hope you tune into this last edition. You can find us where you find all your podcasts and also at the Spokesman-Review website. Thanks again for tuning in. We'll see you down the road.